The sacred is revealed in the ordinary. There is a beauty in this. But how do we discover the mystery of the sacred in our seemingly mundane existence? Welcome to Revealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Let's join our hosts, Katie McAllister and Tony Pickler, as they explore the lives of people, organizations, and resources that will help us delve into the sacredness of the ordinary.
Welcome to our 12th episode of Revealed, where we are interviewing a very special guest. Tony, can you introduce our guest, please?
Thanks, Katie. We are honored to be interviewing today for this podcast Dick Bennett. Most people in Green Bay and all throughout Wisconsin and the country actually know Dick, so doesn't need a whole lot of introduction, but just to tell you a little bit about him. I've known Dick since the 1970s when he was coaching high school basketball over at Eau Claire Memorial High School, and followed his career through UW Stevens Point and then, of course, at UW Green Bay. He went on to Wisconsin, brought that team to the Final Four, which was an exciting time for the state of Wisconsin, then finished his career out at Washington State. Dick, we are so honored to have you as a guest, our 12th guest here on Revealed. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, Tony and Katie.
Why don't we start with the big question? What got you into coaching?
I loved basketball, probably my weakest sport as an athlete, and I went to a school, Ripon College, where I was able to play all three sports, football and baseball and basketball, and still I loved basketball primarily because I thought and still do think that it is the purest form of team play that exists in athletic competition, meaning everybody does everything in concert. And there are roles, there are stars, but the unity that is required to become, a special team is unlike anything I know of. I don't know enough about hockey. I don't know enough about soccer or rugby, or any other team sport. And I love football and I love baseball. But basketball has a synergy that you could take 5 individuals who aren't great and put them against 5 individuals who measure up individually much greater than those other individuals. And that synergy can make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. I wasn't a great student. I was a good student, but not a great student. And I thought, I can do this. And so never intended to go beyond high school coaching. I was taught a little Phi Ed, and then I taught 8 years of English in my 11 years at the high school level. And to tell you the truth, those were my most enjoyable coaching days.
Mm-hmm. I remember those days back in the Eau Claire Memorial. And we don't want to talk about basketball the entire show, but we'd be remiss if we didn't delve into a little bit of your coaching career. So in terms of your most memorable coaching moments, what would you say are some things that stand out to you?
Oh, gosh. I was a rebuilder. I realized early I wasn't comfortable with high-level expectation in inheriting or taking over a program that had been really successful, and the expectations were there. And even the advice to say, well, this is how we do it. These are our traditions, and we would like you to follow them. And so I kind of gravitated toward programs, even in high school, that were down or on the way down, so that I could kind of do it my own way, because the way I thought would work was not in a spectacular, high-octane, outscore people, but rather maybe control tempo. I was influenced heavily by Al McGuire, who was, I think, the originator of tempo control, role-playing by his team. He had guys that hardly ever shot, and I thought if you can get people to buy in, this is the way to do it. Not the popular style, and it's less popular now, as my son Tony could tell you, when it comes to recruiting, because everybody wants to go on and play at the highest level. that was my approach from the beginning. And so I chose programs that appeared to need rebuilding and always hoped that I could make it better than when I came in. And sometimes that happened, perhaps a few times it didn't.
You brought Oakland Memorial to the state championship, as I remember, championship game. You brought you brought Stevens Point, right, to the national tournaments, and you brought UW Green Bay to national prominence, and you brought Wisconsin to the Final Four. So you had some pretty memorable moments.
But I always lost a big one in the end. That needs to be pointed out. That was my DNA. I remember in high school, I was a losing pitcher in the state championship game, and then I lost the state championship at Eau Claire Memorial and the national NAIA title at Point. And at Green Bay, we couldn't get past that first round. So, if the records need to be accurate, you have to put me down as a bit of a failure also.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in coaching?
Actually, I'd have to say myself. I think if any coaches are listening, they'll understand that we fight all of the temptations that exist, pride, anger, even a little bit of selfishness. It's so easy to get carried away with anything that's in the limelight, even a little bit. And that doesn't compare with the heavy-duty limelight that exists in many occupations. But coaching is, I felt, one occupation where a fairly average guy intellectually can experience the real highs and lows, because the euphoria after a big win, the sadness after a tough loss is real. It's not like what we know to be important, births of children, deaths of friend, but in the life that we can live day to day, those emotions are real. And coaching can be a very lonely road. And I've written that note to a number of coaches who have struggled or have been released or whatever. I say it's a lonely business. And somehow we need to be able to get through this. And I experienced both ends of it, as have my children, because two of my children, our children, have gone into coaching. Our daughter, Kathy, who is very successful, and of course, Tony, who's having a lot of success. But I know it can be a lonely road because everybody has an opinion on what you should do, even in success, and certainly in failure. So I labored with that always. And, not to segue into the Christian aspect, before I went through a period where I was really close to stepping aside. Not many were aware of that or would even care, but I was offered the job of my dreams, and that was the Wisconsin job. But I didn't know if I could do it. I really didn't. As I said, I thought I was a good high school coach. I thought I was okay collegiately, but I happened to get good kids. And I looked at what it took, but mostly I said, if I'm going to go to Wisconsin and my faith is real, there's going to be a clash, which I did experience in some ways rather dramatically. But at any rate, I was into what would Jesus do? Remember those little bracelets? What would Jesus do? And it became, what did Jesus do and how did he do it? And I said, maybe I can continue with some of the attributes that Christ modeled, taught, like humility. I could find players who don't think they're going to play in the NBA, that just want to do what they can. We can play with passion the way Christ and his followers, went to the cross and were passionate. We can play with passion, and that always, I use that in terms of trying to play defense passionately. And he corralled 12 guys to change history. And so the unity that was, I thought, existent in 12 pretty ordinary people created an incredible result. And so perhaps we can, find that synergy if we can get humble people who will be passionate about it. And the servanthood mentality is the way I wanted to play anyhow. Make the next pass. Be a helper on defense. Play to your strengths, which will lead to the strengths of others, whether it's setting screens or keeping people off the glass or whatever. You can come up with a number of basketball experiences on the court that require servanthood. And then finally, Christ always, and biblically I've seen a number, be thankful always. And that is where the wisdom came from, because we got beat embarrassingly. I'm sure a lot of my friends in Green Bay will remember the first year or two. It was pretty ugly, and but that's where the wisdom exists. Either you say, I'm going to stay the course, or I'm going to make changes, and I kind of did both in my career and learning from mostly the tough situations. And I'll never forget, for example, the most devastating loss, which wasn't for me, though I was devastated when my son's team lost a few years ago to the 16th seed. Now, it wasn't that bad. That was a good team. It could happen to anybody. But to be the first, and I remember how well he handled it. And that experience, emotionally, even strategically, played a role in them coming back the following year to win it all. Mm-hmm. Christ's way, really provided, if nothing else, the inspiration and the confidence that if I can stay true, and I went through the Bible, and I won't bore you with that, but I took every reference to humility, to passion, to unity, to servanthood and thankfulness that existed, and I listed them all, and I said, well, it's your choice. Either you try to stay that course, and when you get off of it, you confess and try to get back on. And so those were the pillars. And I remember when I went to Wisconsin, when they built the Kohl Center, I laminated those cards and buried them in the foundation down there. Mm-hmm. And my son has done the same thing out at Virginia. So it might sound hokey, phony to some, but I know it's real with Tony, and I fight to keep it real in my own life and stumble a lot even then.
Those pillars have formed a lot of young men in terms of your coaching career, but I also know that you're a husband and a father, and so I would imagine those pillars have formed somewhat your family life as well. I'm curious, how did you balance your role as husband and father with coaching and the rigors that it takes to be a big-time coach?
Not very well, I'll admit that. My wife has been the rock in our marriage forever, and she understood and allowed the freedom that I needed to do my job. And I tried to explain that to our children, and I got a little better as time wore on, and they understood that I was gone. I coached in those early years where I had one or no assistants, and so recruiting was done. You had to get in your car. We didn't have courtesy cars or any of that. Just get in the car and go, and travel the state, and simply be involved almost totally. And so it required a very strong partner, and I was able to do that. And I got better with my son, probably better than I am now while he's coaching. But at any rate, without Ann, it would have been a mess.
Obviously, by how you're answering these questions, your faith and spirituality are very important to you. It's pretty obvious.
Without question. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and my mother and I lived with our grandparents in Pittsburgh while my father was in the Second World War. And I remember my grandparents, all four of them were from Italy, and three did not speak English. So I would go with my grandmother. She would take me and my aunt, Marg, down into the inner city to a novena every Tuesday. We'd ride the incline down the hill, and I didn't understand it. All I knew was I was going to get a toy if I went with them. And I saw the the reverence that existed in the family. Aunt Marg, in fact, had a brother who was a priest. And like so many, that reverence made an impression, but it kind of, I don't know, kind of wears thin after a while. You know, you get away to school and say, I don't know if all that stuff is, but it was always deep. And so I've been, a lifelong Catholic, and I know that everything goes back for me to the cross of Christ. And I learned early that Paul said, woe is me if I don't understand that. I'm not a preacher, but I understand it. And I believe it. My faith is shaken at times, but it always comes back. And the hardest part, I would say, in coaching or in any public activity is there is always something that challenges your faith that appears to be as big. And I realize God doesn't like rivals. And when you accept one of his rivals as being overly important, he will tell you in some way you profess to be a Christian, and yet you allow yourself to be drawn to this. And that, if you were to ask me what was my biggest challenge and is my biggest challenge, it is that I, for whatever reason, suffer through my son and our children when they were coaching or involved in athletics. It still burns deep, and it is a constant thorn.
Talking of your children, they've all been successful in various walks of life. Can you talk a little bit about them, maybe your pride in what they've done and what they've accomplished?
Well, Kathy, our oldest, unfortunately has had so many bad breaks. She was a great player. She was arguably the best player in our family. She led a team to a state championship, was first team All-State. I was told by one of the top women collegiate coaches she was one of the best 5 point guards in America after her junior year. And she was, she was being recruited, and she tore her knees up before her senior year. She tore one knee completely. And so she was unable to play for 2 years, and she made a bit of a comeback. Actually, played on scholarship at Green Bay, and didn't she, after 1 year, tear the other knee. So her career was over, and she went to grad school for a while and then decided she wanted to coach, and she went into coaching. Did well, won a conference title, won a national title at Oshkosh. Went 31-0 her last year, rebuilt the University of Evansville Division I program, went to Indiana. She was hired the same year Coach Knight was fired. And she was there, and in her fourth year, they won the Big Ten Conference Tournament, went to the NCAA. But unfortunately, prior to one of the games, she was in a head-on car collision and broke her neck. And she actually coached in the tournament with a halo brace on her, screwed into her head. And really was kind of the end of her, the part that made her such a good coach, because she had a lot of issues after, a lot of medical issues. She continued for another year and then sat out for 4 years, came back as an assistant, tried it, but she was not the same, having understood. We almost lost her. But she's now retiring from sales for an athletic company and is happy. Then Amy, who's been a speech therapist in Green Bay for 30 years, has raised 4 wonderful children, is an excellent speech therapist, instructor, teacher at Green Bay Southwest High School. Just much like her mother in so many ways. And all 4 of her children have done well. Unfortunately, one of them has decided to go into coaching, and no advice from me has sunk in. And then Tony, of course, is our youngest, and he has, I don't have to, he's done far more than I ever dreamed could be done. And they have 2 children.
Excellent.
And he's in his 15th year.
Yeah.
No, 14th year. I'm sorry, 14th year.
Time flies.
Mm-hmm. So the purpose of this podcast is really finding the sacred in our ordinary lives. So how do you, world-renowned coach, find the sacred on and off of the court? How do you find the sacred in ordinary life?
Well, I'm off the court permanently, but Ann and I have done for, I would say, 25 years, is we start every morning with our reading. Now, I read, in the last maybe 5 years, I, on my own, read the Mass. This is our day, and there's so, I just love that, the morning, and then the Mass, and then I don't always read the night, but I often do if I'm still awake. But at any rate, and then we have read for all that time from My Utmost for His Highest, Oswald Chambers' writings, which are powerful and enlightening. And then there's usually one other area that we will take on to challenge us. And most recently, and I had done this with a group of men for a period of 3 years, in the study of the 27th Psalm. And a man named Paul David Tripp led that. And so we have gone back and done that, and we do that every morning. It takes us about an hour, and it's a time that we don't necessarily talk about the kids or families. We certainly don't talk about basketball. I don't talk much basketball. I don't even watch it on TV anymore. I love watching baseball. I love watching football, and I will do that. But basketball still triggers some of those old rivalry, anger experiences that I went through for near 40 years. But so we do that, and that has, and if there's a prayer request, we'll do that. And I have a couple friends I talk with regularly, and we'll meet, which has helped. And Tony I must say this about him, before I knew him, he kind of, even this time, he kind of gives me a little nudge out of my comfort zone, because I don't go out and do much anymore. And it makes me kind of at least verbalize some of these things that have been important to me and have been pushed to the background. But the one that has not is Ann and I getting together every morning to do our study, our reading, whatever prayer life we need to have.
Dick, it has been an absolute pleasure sitting down and talking with you. As I said, I've followed you through most of your career of 40 years of coaching. I have respected you. I have looked up to you and admired you, because I always think that you always did and continue to do everything you do the right way. And I know you used to call it the Green Bay way when you're in Green Bay, but you did it the right way. And I think there's so many people in our community that would say the same thing I do. They respect you, they look up to you, and they're grateful that you have been in the lives of so many people. So thanks so much for being part of this podcast. It's been an absolute privilege.
Well, thank both of you for honoring me to be with you, and thank you for allowing me to share some strengths and weaknesses.
Thanks, Dick.
This has been Revealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin.